Talking with the experts.
It really depends on what your objectives and goals are. For someone that is 35, 40 years old and they've really done well and they're kind of getting burned out and they kind of want to move on to the next thing, they're just tired of doing what they were doing. Maybe they fell into the business uh, and they started it and it kind of took off on them, but they weren't all that passionate about it and they just want to move on to something they feel a little bit more passionate. Well, that person is going to have different motivations when exiting a business and how he wants to exit the business versus someone that is looking to retire. Their motivations are entirely different. And they may be able to, for tax considerations and other things, they may structure the transaction differently on how they want to exit and how much they want in cash and how much they're willing to carry.
Talking with the experts.
Hello and welcome to Talking with the Experts. My name's Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com, and Talking with the Experts is about all things business by business owners for business owners, and you can find it on all good podcasting streaming platforms and on YouTube. And I would really love it if you could go across to the channel and subscribe to the videos and maybe to click on the bell so that you get notified whenever my videos are uploaded. And today my guest is Marvin Storm, and he's got a quote that says, every entrepreneur needs to figure out how they will exit their business. The most profitable exits don't happen by luck, they're planned. And a little while ago, Marvin sold his business and thought he would just sit back, take it easy and enjoy his life. And it didn't take long before he got bored. So this got him to thinking about his last exit from his business and realised that if he had been better prepared for this exit, it could have gone a lot better for him. So his juices were filled and had filled his thought processes that led him to start the business called Business Exit Stories Podcast, and then write a book called Pack Your Parachute, How to Double the Amount of Money You Put in Your Pocket When You Sell Your Business, and developing a process to maximize the enterprise value of a business prior to exit. Welcome, Marvin, and thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's delightful. I appreciate you having me.
Sure. So I guess a lot of entrepreneurs start by a passion or a thought or something. They think, they've got a service, a product or whatever to offer their audience, their clients, potential clients. So how did you come up with this thought?
Well, as you mentioned a little bit in the introduction there, I, have been involved in several businesses throughout my career spanning several decades, and I've had some small exit, but the last exit was fairly good sized, and it involved, boards of directors and, outside capital that I had brought in from private equity and bankers, and it was an entirely different scale of an exit, and I just hadn't been down that road before. And a lot of entrepreneurs, people that run businesses, spend most of their careers with their nose to the grindstone, not looking up to see what's around the corner or down the road. And when it comes time that an exit is becoming imminent, or they start thinking about it anyway, they really are kind of at a loss because they haven't done that before. Entrepreneurs are good at figuring out things, and they learn by going through a process and making mistakes and self-correcting and figuring out the process, and they become pretty good at it. But an exit is generally something you do just once, and you're not going to get too many times to, learn through experience. And it may be only your only exit when you exit your business. And that was, yeah, at least at the scale of my last exit, I had never done that before. And I made a lot of mistakes. Uh, I did okay, but I could have done better if I had been down that, or if I had a mentor or a coach, or had been more familiar with the process. And after I sold my business, I thought I would just sort of fade away, as you said, and I took it easy for a while. And being a type A personality and kind of in go mode all the time, it didn't take long before I was bored stiff. And I listened to podcasts all the time. And I got to thinking about my last exit and what I did right and what I did wrong. And I got to thinking, there's probably a lot of other people out there just like me who haven't done this before, that if they had someone or could learn from other people's experiences, maybe they wouldn't have to make those mistakes themselves. And so I got to thinking about that. And initially, I was going to just interview people that had exited their business and have them tell their stories. I did that for a few interviews, and I could tell very quickly that every entrepreneur thinks their exit was the exit to end all exits. Theirs was bigger and better than anybody else's, and that was unique and interesting, and it certainly was for them. But to make it engaging and interesting for a wide and large audience, I didn't think it was going to be a real uphill climb. Then I just had this epiphany one day. Why aren't I talking to the people that do this every day, all day long? And that's the mergers and acquisition specialists, transaction attorneys, CPAs, the chartered accountants, investment bankers, wealth managers, people that are involved in the transaction flow of helping people sell their business. And so I did. I contacted a few people I knew, and then when I ran out of those people, I started talking to people I'd been introduced to or referred to, and they have hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of transactions that they've been involved in. I asked them to pick out two good transactions and two bad transactions for the podcast, and we would just have a discussion about those transactions and what the takeaways were and what others can learn by listening to these transaction stories. And it's been just a home run hit. The podcast is always interesting. Rarely are there two stories that are the same or even close to being the same. And it just got a lot of positive feedback, a lot of lift under the wings of the podcast. And more importantly, I just love hearing from people that listen to the podcast saying, quote, things like, I'm sure glad I listened to that story. That guy sounds just like me. I don't want to end up like him. I'm going to do things differently, and that's really the purpose of the podcast. And it's just been enjoyable to do that.
Absolutely. So would you like to share with us the things that you learned from your last exit, the good things and the bad things?
Well, I learned a lot of things, and it's really difficult. I mean, the learnings, and when you go through, there are just so many things that can come up and go wrong. I just decided that I would, kind of summarize them into major categories. So I came up with, kind of 9 categories or 9 things that are general themes. And I created an acronym from that, and it was parachute. And I really used the metaphor of, a pilot that when something goes wrong in their plane, they always have their parachute packed, and they know who packed the parachute. They know it's packed right. They don't wait for the plane to be on fire and then it's going down with engine troubles to try to pack their parachute and jump. They grab that parachute, they go for the exit, and they jump and, float gently to the ground. So that metaphor really meant a lot to me. I think that people that pack their parachute, is metaphorically speaking, that they know they're going to jump from their business at some point in time. They're going to exit that plane, that business that's taken them so far and so high, and treated them good and provided a living for themselves and their family and hundreds of employees perhaps. But they're going to have to figure out, people aren't going to live forever. Now, that's one option. That's not likely to happen. People are going to close up and discontinue their business or go bankrupt. That's not a great option. Uh, they're going to pass it on to a partner or a family friend or someone like that. Or they're going to sell to someone they don't know, a third party. 95% of the time these days, since there are very few generational, second and third generation businesses nowadays, it's probably going to be sold to a third party. And if that's likely the outcome, then you know what type of exit you're going to have and what you need to do. And there are some very hard, fast rules and things that you need to be aware of. And that's why I created this acronym for parachute that really, starts for, being prepared and, not being addicted or over reliant on a set of customers and, having different revenue types and adopting, some sort of competitive advantage or competitive moat and the culture of your company and all these things that, parachute sort of stands for. And with the E at the end of the parachute is, being ready for that exit and what you need to do, kind of that final checklist of things you need to do when you get ready for an exit. And those are the type of things that I went through my experience. And when I was looking at what I learned, I kind of categorized these things and came up with this acronym that I think it does really apply to all types of businesses.
So I guess what is that leads into the question then? What is the best exit strategy for a business?
Well, I hate to say this, but it depends. It really depends on what your objectives and goals are. For someone that is 35, 40 years old and they've really done well and they're kind of getting burned out and they kind of want to move on to the next thing, they're just tired of doing what they were doing. Maybe they fell into the business and they started it and it kind of took off on them, but they weren't all that passionate about it and they just want to move on to something they feel a little bit more passionate. Well, that person is going to have different motivations when exiting a business and how he wants to exit the business versus someone that is looking to retire. Their motivations are entirely different. And they may be able to, for tax considerations and other things, they may structure the transaction differently and how they want to exit and how much they want in cash and how much they're willing to carry in a promissory note. Some people are just interested in legacy. And actually, I was on a podcast just a few days ago with a person that had a business that had been around for 35 years. And they had started it from their garage, had grown it to hundreds of employees. And they were well respected, had built up a tremendous brand in the region that they lived in. And they were known far and wide for being the best of the best. And their motivation, they had done very well. They had invested money outside of their business. They weren't all that concerned because they were financially solid. And the most motivating thing for them was they wanted to find someone that would carry on their legacy. They didn't want the business to disappear or change tremendously. They wanted someone to carry the torch and continue to grow it and continue to provide the customer service and continue to nurture the brand. And so they actually took less money for their business because they found the right person who was much younger, had their similar values, had lived in the community most of his life, and they were willing to stay on for several years at almost no pay, very low compensation. They were just motivated to make sure that what they built endured. So it depends on what the motivations are. For someone that is looking to invest in their next project, they may want all that money in cash, not carry back anything. And so it's motivation that is the key to structuring a successful exit. What is successful for one person may not be the right type of exit or what they would consider a success for someone else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, depending on where you are in your life. And, as you say, what motivates you to either exit the business or to stay on as an advisor, I guess, in that capacity. So, I mean, bearing that in mind, I guess strategies, there must be something like, investing the money something, or getting the best payment option available, paying off your mortgage, or doing whatever. But if you want to stay, I guess, financially fluent, what are the best ways for people to do that if, say, they have to exit because of ill health or something?
Well, I think there are some key things that for anyone that has a business out there that's listening to the podcast here and thinking about, well, maybe I should start thinking about an exit. I've been working for the last 5, 10, 20 years and, gee, I hadn't thought about selling, but maybe I should start thinking about that. Those people, and I go back to my metaphor of the parachute, those people that will start packing their parachute today, let's say you're going to exit in 3 years, those people that will start packing their parachute now, and by the time 3 years shows up, if they follow this system that I outline in my upcoming book, it should be published later this year or early next year. I'm just putting in the final touches on that. If you follow the process, you will find that you'll have a tremendous different outcome in dollars, actual dollars that you put in your pocket. I wouldn't say 100% guarantee, because I don't know how diligent people will follow the process, but I can confidently state or provide a high degree of proof or confidence that those people that start today will probably double the amount of money that they can put in their pocket by the time that exit date arrives, if they have 2, 3, or 4 years to plan for that, and they do the right things, and they are able to focus on a high degree of execution on teeing up their business for sale. And for those that, for a variety of reasons decide that they need to sell their business. And generally what happens, I find that 80 or 90% of the time, a lot of people come to the table and reach out to a business broker or an M&A specialist, or someone that facilitates business transfers and sales, and they show up at their front door and they need to sell tomorrow. They need to sell as quickly as possible because there is a family emergency, there's a health issue, there is a partner issue, they can't get along with their partner anymore, or they're just burned out, or a competitor enters the market and is providing a lot of downward pressure on pricing and margins, and they just don't see how they can continue to compete, so they want to get out. For all of those reasons, if you are not prepared, it becomes very evident very quickly that you need to get out. And when you need to get out, it's kind of like a lion sensing that their prey is wounded and they pick up the scent of blood. They know that they can attack and they will be able to be successful in bagging their prey. Well, people that are buying businesses will be able to sense that you are motivated, that you don't have a lot of time, that your books aren't in order. Your presentation on why you're selling doesn't really kind of make a lot of sense, or a whole host of things. And you won't be able to maximize the value that you've spent decades and maybe a lifetime building. So my advice, quite frankly, is if you don't have to sell today, pick a date in the future that makes sense for you and your family and your employees, and work toward it. Plan. Put things in place. Every buyer, just put yourself on the other side of the table. A buyer is coming to the table. He's going to want certain things, just like you would want if you were buying a business. Well, what are those things? Things like, are your employees loyal to you? When the new owner comes in, do you have employment agreements in place? Are your employees well taken care of? Are they compensated competitively? Are your competitors going to pick off your most valuable employees, leaving it difficult for the new buyer to succeed? Do you have concentration of revenue? Is a large portion of your revenue with one customer? I had a podcast interview a few months back where, if you can believe this, I couldn't believe it actually. I'd heard of concentration of revenue being 60 or 70% of your total sales. That means if you had $1 million in sales, or you know, you have 700,000 dollars in those revenue coming from one customer. That's not all that unusual. Not a great thing to have, but it does happen. But this particular business had 97% of his business from one customer. He was in the whole, he had sold a product and got into, the largest retailer in the world being Walmart. And 97% of his business was with one customer. And so if that customer decided to go in a different direction, he has nothing, absolutely nothing. And so when a buyer comes to the table, that freaks the buyer out. You cannot finance a business. Even with 50, 60% of your revenue with one customer, it's impossible unless you have a very special relationship with the bank or a tremendous amount of collateral that you can collateralize the loan outside. You're never going to be able to finance that business. You just can't do it. Bankers will not lend because that's a huge risk factor. So when you take a look at those things, you should have no more than 5 or 10% of your total revenue with one customer. And if you do, then you got a problem. But if you have 2 or 3 years to plan and work your way out of that problem, it's very solvable. But it's not solvable in the last 6 months or a year. It's impossible in most cases. So those are just a couple of things,
Yeah. So would you advise that people would go through a broker or a similar type person rather than just doing it themselves?
Oh, entrepreneurs are free spirits. They're can-do people. They tend to believe and have proven in their careers that they can solve difficult problems. And I think most entrepreneurs, if they were to sell 10 businesses, by the time they got to the 6th, 7th, or 8th business, they would have figured it out. They would have gone through a learning curve. They would not make the same mistakes again. And they would do a pretty good job of figuring out. But unfortunately, unless you're a serial entrepreneur and have done this a dozen times, you're only going to do it once. Generally, like myself, I'd had several small exits that were okay, but high 6-figure exits. But this was a high 7-figure exit, and it was millions of dollars involved. And as I said, different rules, different game. It's like playing in the minor leagues versus the major leagues. Once you get up into the major leagues where you're playing for with professionals and people that do this all the time, because a lot of times I sold my business to, a group that bought businesses as routine. And they were very good at what they did. And they had some very specific processes they followed. And I just wasn't familiar with those processes, and I wasn't able to give them everything that they needed. And so they were able to have negotiation points that if I had been better prepared, as I said before, I would have been able to be in a much stronger position to negotiate different types of terms. And that's the same with every business. And so if you're smart, you don't want to try to do it yourself. You always find somebody that is a pro, is an exit, that this is what they do for a living. They work with companies like yours all the time. They do 10, 20, 30 deals a year. So this is not new to them. They can help you, hold your hand, mentor, coach you, help you through the process. And whatever fees that you pay them, you'll probably make it back double, triple, quadruple, if not 10 times the amount of money that you pay them for someone that's really good. Of course, you got to find someone that's good and not someone that doesn't really understand your business or hasn't had a lot of experience.
That makes a heap of sense, actually. So your book, Pack Your Parachutes, coming out later this year, and your podcast is Business Exit Stories Podcast. And where else can people find you, Marvin?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn at Marvin L. Storm. That's might just go to Marvin L. Storm. I'm there on LinkedIn. If you needed to get a hold of me, you can just reach out through the businessexitstories.com website. You can get the podcast there, or you can go to any of the major podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts, that's listed there. And if you are a business owner that is thinking about exiting sometime in the future, years or maybe even 5 or more years down the road, you will thoroughly enjoy this podcast because every podcast episode has 4 separate, distinct transactional stories that have all sorts of twists and turns and some real sad stories and some home runs, that of how, there is a way to position your business for a home run, out of the park home run, just something far beyond what you could ever imagine. If you have the type of business and set the strategy appropriately, you can have a strategic buyer, acquire you, and strategic buyers will pay way more than what it's worth financially from a traditional valuation perspective. They'll pay double, triple if it fits they need your business for their strategy. There are some phenomenal stories on the podcast of strategic exits that go from 20 million to 120 million because the buyer absolutely needed that business in that region, and they couldn't let it go. And they way overpaid for that business because it was so crucial for them. So it's stories like that you may not be able to exit at that level, but the principles are the same. If you may have a business worth $1 million, £1 million, or whatever currency you are listening in, but a strategic buyer will double or triple if you have the right type of business. And there's a method to the madness, is all I'm saying. So listen to the podcast, or when my book comes out, if you'd like. I have a free report actually that I have written that capsulize these 9 principles, that the acronym parachute, that talks about how to double the value of the amount of money that goes into your bank account. If you'd like that report, it's free. You can just download it. If you just go to businessexitstories.com/report, you can download the little booklet that I've created that gives you kind of a primer, that is a abbreviated, top view treatment of the full book that's coming out later this year.
Oh, excellent. Good on you. That'll be helpful to a lot of people, I'm sure. Anyway, Marvin, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, and thank you for sharing your wisdom.
You taking the time.
All right, talk soon.
All right, bye now.